Ascent Akihabara, the most anticipated event in Grand Archive history so far, is already at the end of next week. And being that we just had a couple of Ascents back to back in the last few weeks, and Akihabara is a huge event and the final event of the Distorted Reflections metagame, I thought it made sense to do one last DTR meta update for you all, especially considering the fact that we saw in Ascent Auckland and Ascent Niagara a lot of alignment with a lot of the top 8 decks. It seems that going into Akihabara, we finally have a pretty locked-in metagame as far as what some of the top contenders are. So in this video, we're going to look at the GA metagame as it stands at the end of the Distorted Reflection season, help you prep your final card slots if you're going into Akihabara, and just kind of discuss where the meta's at and just a tiny bit about where it might be going with the release of Phantom Monarchs. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. What's up, everyone? It's Dan with Main Deck, and here we are at the TCG Architect page for both of these events. We have Auckland and then we also have Niagara pulled up right now. Starting with Auckland, I just thought it would make sense in this meta update video just to really briefly discuss the alignment we're going to see. We're going to talk about all of the different deck styles that we see across just the top 8 in both of these Ascents, because we had not only some of the best players in the game at both events, but I think with the repeat performance we see from some of these decks, we really do have a lot of alignment that we need to pay attention to going into Akihabara. There are a lot of viable decks, but you're definitely going to see these decks probably either the most commonly, or at least these are ones you need to watch out for, because Akihabara is going to have tons of Grand Archives great players at it, and they may well be playing these decks once again. So the quick and dirty here to discuss, actually, let's pull up Niagara to start because it was the first one. Both of these events were won by Wind, Razorgale, Kongming, and then we have a spread of very similar decks with just a little bit of variance as far as like which Fire Crux decks were making it. Did a water deck make it in at all, as they did in Niagara Falls? And we look at the spread of the elements and the spirits, and we see something very common among both. We're at Niagara right now, and we do see fire was the most popular by far, with wind just trailing behind. But then as we went into Auckland instead, look how much wind caught up. Now, Auckland was a smaller event, of course, so that is going to maybe skew, whether or not this is kind of like a standard distribution we can expect or not, but definitely following Niagara going into Auckland with the success of Wind at the event, especially with the return of Razorgale into the metagame. I think a lot of players were hinging on, okay, this is the time to bring Wind, and we actually see Water brought down just a little bit as well. Again, this is currently Auckland going back to Niagara. We had a little bit more water, fitting maybe because we're at the site of the waterfall, but of course, as is in the name, water fell and then did not perform as well in Auckland, not even making it into that top cut like it did in Niagara. So not only in Auckland are we seeing more wind decks in general, but we are actually seeing higher performance from Fire going into the top 8 with 4 Fire decks in the top 8 of Ascent Auckland. Well, Niagara only had these 2 Fire decks and a lot more wind to rely on. Now, there are a couple other outliers here. Asana, of course, topping both events. Absolutely crazy. Asana is clearly one of the best Tristan players in the world at this point, going back to back Niagara to Auckland. But RNG with the Wind Wakeup coming in here, a very, very potent deck. And then Fruitcake on Wind Arisanna, and of course Superior, a player who's extremely good at Genbu, did manage to top 8 as well. There is just a lot of similarities here. A Seiryuu in both, a Kongming in both, a Tristan Shadowstrike in both, a Wakeup in both, at least 2 Crux in both, and then just a little bit of variety after that, with that main difference being another Crux and a Fire Ciel in Auckland versus the Arisanna and the Genbu making it in Niagara. Now, I think at this point, these are some of the decks that you definitely need to be most prepared to deal with. You are going into Akihabara, you have to expect that the players here are looking at the performance of these decks at Ascents. And while it is a somewhat wide field, it is also somewhat narrow in that you are going to see, I think, more Tristans continuing to be played. You're going to see Razorgale coming in there trying to snipe games. You're going to see tons of Crux, Lorraine, and Merlin showing up. And then we have these other Wind decks that continue to perform. Wind Wakeup, Wind Arisanna. You go into these events and you just have to be prepared to deal with this field. So let's really briefly just cruise through some of these 9 different decks and just talk about why they're doing so well and what you can kind of do to be prepared for them. All right, now let's start, of course, with the winner of both events, but we're going to look at the Auckland version, EMP's Wind Razorgale Kongming. And the core difference in these two versions really comes down to whether or not they're playing things like Ardent Cloud Striker. And in this case, EMP went for the Acolyte of Cultivation instead of very powerful ally that has gotten not enough respect, I think, in the metagame. And going for the full kind of Rictus Tiding package with things like the Unbroken Mustang to draw, the Ascent Protector, and of course those Razorgale Callings, the namesake of the deck. Of course, the idea with this deck, you sit there, you are going to play win cards, dig, draw, find Razorgale Calling, drop it. Now, once you get a Razorgale down, every time you play a win card, activate a win card, you are going to deal 1 damage to your opponent's champion. And you just kind of 1,000 cuts to get there until they are close enough to go down to your big Tempest Downfall bursty turn, which you can enable with things like the Ventus Staff of Zephyrs to get a suppress on something, making these Tempest Downfalls free to activate, which gets pretty crazy. I do like in here that we're running the Expeditious Openings. I think this is really cool and a fun way to sort of play around a lot of tricky things and put some surprising damage on the board as well, using things like Ascent Protector to potentially return that Acolyte of Cultivation. I think that's really good in here because then on your next turn, you activate a spell, it's free to activate. You actually can play this for 3 less by activating an Expeditious Opening, which is a spell itself, and I think that is a really cool combination. I think it's a really sweet list. Now, the big thing about this deck is, are you prepared to face this? Are you running things like the Nullifying Mirror, right? And it's a tough deck to tech for a little bit because even though you can go ahead and answer its Razorgales with Fantasia Hate, it plays cards to bring them back. It's got the Cyclical Breezes to take those back. It can Zephyr your Nullifying Lantern so that the breeze can once again target the Razorgale and bring it back. It's fairly resilient, and it can even win games without putting the Razorgales into play because, again, it bursts with this Tempest Downfall. It just can play an ally game with the Acolytes and the Ascent Protectors and just punch damage on you while it just digs and digs. But even though it is so tough to fight, it is a deck where you absolutely have to respect. And I think looking at the amount of wind in the metagame in general, I think you are perhaps trolling a little bit if you are entering into Akihabara without putting a Nullifying Mirror somewhere in your list. Again, it's not the be-all end-all. It doesn't just stop the matchup, but it lets you win the game when they're trying to hold on with their Veiling Breezes. It can shut down the Windmill Engineer card draw that they're trying to do to build that big hand initially so that they can go off on you. It's a card that in basically every Wind deck we're going to look at, it's got some potential utility to it. And with Wind as prominent as it is in this metagame, I think you have to bring it in. And I do think these decks preyed on the fact that going back to back, week to week, a lot of players maybe just still weren't ready, didn't know whether to expect to see Razorgale, but going into Akihabara, you have to expect that this deck is going to show up. Now, another deck that you, I think, have to expect, especially considering how much SEA loves Guo Jia, is Wind Seiryuu. And here I have main deck Alex's second place list from Niagara Falls. I love Alex's list. I love this is sort of the list that main deck honed in on a while ago that we really like, that runs the Shimmercloak Assassins, that runs sort of a bigger go wide ally package to be able to close those games off while still being able to do the kind of turbo to Seiryuu's command, Byaku's command, do a ton of damage, get your free arcane blasts. And he also really likes this one of Regal Inquisition in the main, which I think is really hot tech because going into this metagame now, if you're bringing Seiryuu, you have to expect that your opponent's going to be Tristan sometimes. There are going to be some of these decks that are playing things like Ensnaring Fumes that are just going to threaten your Seiryuu and stop you from just being able to kind of go to town and take them out. So having this main board answer, I think is really good. It's something I would definitely consider. I would be looking at main deck Alex's list if I'm looking at bringing Seiryuu into the event in Akihabara. It's a deck, though, that it just checks so many decks that are just too slow. We did see on stream Fruitcake versus main deck Alex, where he just found the lethal line both games, went way too fast for Arisanna to be able to handle. And that's the kind of thing that it does to a lot of decks where you get these matchups where it's just, they just can't handle your raw speed and your raw power. You have the ability to put your Fabled Azurite Facestone, flip into Seiryuu out there and just put a giant Taunter on the board that can stop fire aggro decks in their tracks as well. It's a deck that's very robust, very powerful. It has spell-based wins, and with this build, with the allies, it also has ally-based wins as well, where you're just going to go ahead and use your Brisk Windtrotter to buff up some of your allies. You're going to flip Beseech Fatestone into 3/4 Pandas, and you're just going to start chunking in damage. If you have never had to deal with a Brisk Windtrottered Shimmercloak Assassin, you might not be prepared for the kind of board states that this is going to put out, all the while just building those counters on Seiryuu, knowing that, okay, fine, after you deal with this board I built, here comes the dragon. It is a powerful deck and definitely one that you need to be aware of. And a really good reason, if you're building Wind, to make sure you're teching in those cards like Ensnaring Fumes and Ravaging Tempest. These are cards that can actually check the Seiryuu, where the Seiryuu player needs to find these Regal Inquisitions, and we have another in the side as well here. You need to find those to be able to take the threats out of the way so you can flip the dragon and win the game sometimes. So pretty crucial to be aware of both the tech to play against it and the way that Seiryuu plays against that. I also have liked some of these Seiryuu builds that main deck Alex didn't run this, but the Spellword Scepter in either the material deck or the sideboard, for when you know your opponent's going, okay, they've got 4 Ensnaring Fumes, I'm just going to put in the Spellword Scepter and the Inquisitions, and I'm just going to go slow and then put out the Scepter, go to level 3, Inquisition them, and then flip my dragon out. When you do that, you can kind of say, yep, the path is clear, flip dragon, win the game. And that's another nice option that you have. Now, I think one of the powerful parts of this deck is just how fast it goes. So I'm not sure I always like going that slow, but it's an interesting option to consider if that is where you've been having more trouble winning games with the deck. But let's move on. And we're going to look at Asana's Wind Shadowstrike Tristan next. Again, topped both of these events. So Asana clearly knows exactly what they're doing with this list. And I think it makes a lot of sense if you're trying to take Tristan into Akihabara to copy a lot of what Asana is doing here. Asana has the basic structure of Wind Tristan that we see down, is going for the Assassin Ripper, which I totally respect. Even though I don't love the lines myself, I totally get stealing games with this. Really great to have, especially just to kind of like out of nowhere take a game against a deck that is otherwise kind of low to the ground, that is going to try and kill you. And instead of some of the tech slots I've been playing with, went with the one of Heavenly Guide, kept the Turbocharge in here, and then a one of Zephyr, as well as a one of Tempest Downfall. And there are just a few tech slots really in the deck at this point, so it's up to you which ones you choose to use. Oh, one of Innervate Agility as well. I did the same thing. I really like that. Yeah, those are the ones Asana went with, which obviously went really well. Now, one thing that's interesting is only 2 Mastermind Scheme in the main, and I really did like having those as a way to go over the top of Wind Razorgale. But looking at their sideboard, we see that Asana is playing some good tech against Razorgale. Now, I don't see that Nullifying Mirror, and I would like to have that just because it is a good way to be able to keep being aggressive instead of just relying on finding like 2 Mastermind Schemes to try to go to an absurd number of prep counters to go over the top of their Veiling Breezes. Instead, just saying, well, you have to have a lot of Veiling Breezes and I have Incaps, and I'm going to use that to make sure I can take you out. That's really good. That said, what Asana brought in is Blanche, and Blanche is really, really sweet right now into decks like Razorgale. Now, of course, Razorgale has ways to answer Blanche, right? Razorgale can suppress Blanche. Razorgale can Tempest Downfall Blanche. But Tristan has ways around that as well, just being able to reclaim and then replay the Blanche or use Ensnaring Fumes prepared to take the Blanche back as well. That's a unique thing that Assassin gets to do. Pull that Blanche back for no reserve at all, and then just replay the Blanche. Means that Tristan can really hold the fort against Razorgale with that Blanche tech in there. also running these Scatter Essences as another way to try and slow the Razorgale down. I really like this. I would definitely be putting these in my sideboard right now going into Razorgale, but given how much wind is in the metagame, I still would be thinking about Mirror. But the fact is, Tristan is a great pick right now. I think it's about 50-50 going into Crux matchups in my experience, and it's a deck that can really pick on a lot of other wind decks in the format. It's got a decent matchup into Seiryuu. It can just kind of win the game against anything else. That's Tristan's thing, right? Tristan, if everything goes right, if her deck kind of works, she finds the sauce. Shadowstrike, what are you going to do about it? I've got double in-cap backing it up. That's very strong. And of course, I have to shout out to the one of Spirel. I think if you're playing Tristan, this is in your deck right now. If it's not in your deck, go put it in the deck. It's so good. Asana knows. I know. Everybody I respect playing Tristan knows. The Spirel is so sick in here. Definitely put that in. But yeah, that's Asana's list. I think it's pretty refined at this point. I really like it. And if I was going to Akihabara, I'd probably nearly identically copy this list. Now I want you to grab a brush and put a little makeup on because it's time to wake up with the Wind Wake Up list. This is Yamakin's deck list from Auckland. And if you haven't seen this list before, I think that makes sense because this has been a list that, we do know this list. This is a list out there. People just call it Boots. People call it Wind Wake Up. This is a list that can sometimes just sit on Spirit and never level up, which is what Yamakin's list is doing. Just goes with that Gwendolyn, enjoying getting to look at that Gwendolyn for the entire game with no champions to go to at all until we sideboard into the Tristan level 1. And that's because this deck has no class bonuses that you really actually care about, and instead just relies on some extremely powerful interactions and being able to put out the Ranger Strides with things like the Cheshire Cat using your Looking Glass so that you can just clock tons of damage on your opponent and then use cards like Draft of Stamina to wake them up and do it again. And it's a deck that you have to respect. It is a deck that is really difficult to fight too. If it ever finds Purse, it just puts her down and she can suppress anything, including herself. She is hard to deal with. She is going to bait less experienced players into making some serious misplays, and then it's just going to crush you with a sudden 12 damage attack out of nowhere. This is a really powerful deck. This is one that you have to watch out for. It draws so many cards too that it's able to play these incapacitates with no class bonus. It's fine. It's fine doing that to win the game. It's a very, very threatening deck, one that you have to be aware of. This is a deck that truly just puts a threat out there and says, hey, if I draw perfect and you don't draw the answer, I just win the game. And obviously it works well enough to have put both Yamakin and RNG into the tops of both of these events. So this is a deck you have to be prepared for. Your deck needs to have a plan for it. Now, this is why I liked playing Tristan in this list, because Tristan naturally has a lot of counterplay, a lot of interaction going into this deck. The ability to, in a worst case scenario, ensnaring Fumes their, super distant ally back to their hand. Okay, cool. I don't have to worry about that anymore for now. But a lot of interaction, they can still play around as well. Like I mentioned Purse being able to just suppress things, but they have a lot of like damage prevention and stuff, like these skirting steps that will annoy the hell out of you. These Aether's Embraces that can, that if they're being attacked, can just wake it up, give it +2/+2, and then it retaliates and kills you. That's all super, super scary. This is a list that, like, if your locals aren't playing this and you're going to Akihabara, you got to be aware that you might go against this list because it has been performing and you might not be ready for it. So definitely something to get some like last minute testing into if you haven't played into this too much yet. It's a strong list and definitely a worthy contender. Now, another thing I've seen a lot in the SEA region is some adoration for Arisanna. So they're after my own heart as a massive Arisanna fan myself, but I would not be going to this event without a plan to deal with Astra, because Astra is a deck that some decks are very good against. Again, I like Seiryuu into this matchup a ton. It's very hard to deal with Seiryuu because it just can go way too fast. But a lot of decks that don't go quite as fast, they have a lot of trouble once Arisanna gets to level 3 and just starts to take over the game. So Fruitcake's list, incredible place to start. Now, honestly, Arisanna lists are like fairly locked in. It's a lot like Tristan, where there isn't like a crazy amount of flex, but there are some things that we see, and I see the return of some tech like Regenerate as a way to just kind of hold the fort against more aggressive decks. We do have that Tend the Land, which is a card that since MRC Alter has been a staple in here because it just lets you put down cards to level with. Gather, which helps your Polaris. Draw cards, it replaces itself. And that's, this is what it's relying on. It wants to find a couple fertile grounds, make 1 million of these herb tokens, put out a Polaris, wipe your board if you're doing anything threatening at all, and then Cosmic Bolt you to death with a lot of control backing it up at that Astra level. I think Arisanna is like, a lot of people thought the Polaris buff killed Arisanna, and I really think it was just the metagame was not good for Arisanna, because Arisanna is coming back now, and there are a lot of cards that do nothing into Polaris, especially given that right now Fracturize is almost non-existent with water, which is exactly where Arisanna gets to come in and say, cool, all these like slow build-up fire Crux decks, yeah, I don't really care. All these ally decks, cool, I'll wipe the board. Arisanna has a lot of matchups that are just like super reasonable. And if a deck isn't going to do something really absurd and over the top, like Seiryuu, then Arisanna, piloted by a skilled pilot, can do extremely well. So, yeah, I like Arisanna a lot going into this metagame, other than you have to be prepared to deal with Seiryuu. And we did see Fruitcake running a couple things like some arrow traps in here, which are a way to deal with it, but out of the board, the more important thing, Ravaging Tempest. And I would even consider maybe just moving more of these into the board, because you gotta draw them. You have to level fast and draw them going into the Seiryuu match. And we do see Fruitcake really respecting how fast you have to level with not only the 4 dungeon guides, but the 2 Beseech the Winds as well. Just to be able, I mean, not just to be able, there's actually a number of things, Beseeching Censor and stuff that you can do that are very strong in this deck, but it gives you additional ways to try and level as fast as possible, because you need to get to the point where you can get this Ravaging Tempest popped, which means you have to get a Polaris out, because you need to pop level herbs. You need to level fast to find level herbs. You might need to Tend the Land and get your fertile grounds to find them to get to the point where you can use the efficiency on this card. And you have to find it after you sideboard as well. And you're going to be leveling and losing cards. So it's tricky. You got to go fast. You do have to try and find an answer to Seiryuu. So maybe would consider a few more of those. But we do see like a massive respect for one of the deck's harder matchups, which was Fractals, 2 Noble Dissolution, 4 Scatter Essence in here. Those that may be a little overboard, but those are still good cards into things like Tristan, good cards obviously into Razorgale. Fractals is probably not something I would be prepared to have to deal with in Akihabara. If my worst matchup is Fractals, I would just say I'm going to lose that and tech against other things. And I think you could make a little bit more room to tech into the Seiryuu match and then do even better. So if you are yourself a good Astra Arisanna player, definitely a good win deck to look at. Now we're going to talk our fire decks as well, starting with Team True's Cabins. Now we're going to talk our fire decks as well, starting with True Champion Cabins, second place list from Auckland, Fire, Crux, Lorraine. Very similar to the list that he played in Niagara, maybe just had a better run this time, tech things a little bit better, was able to make it there though with this list. And yeah, this is a great deck. It's a kind of I would say it's the all-rounder of the Fire Crux list, because you have a lot of this built-in tech thanks to Clarent Reimagined. You have the ability to go late and just push attacks turn after turn. We're running the Ascension combo with the Prismatic Edge, which is a great matchup going into those wind lists, which I think is really good. And then for dealing with Merlin, Cabin loves these surreptitious schemes to be able to remove level counters from Merlin. It really is an all-rounder that also has ways to just go like Hone by Fire, Rending Flame, steal the game early when it needs to, play really defensively with these fluffy shopkeeps. It's got easy banishes in those swords that it can just get back later with the Ascension anyway. It's a great list. Really, really solid. And if you like playing Crux, I think would be relying on Lorraine right now instead of Merlin, just because I think the tech that you have from the Clarent Reimagine, especially considering that we have things like Razorgale running around that are doing non-attack damage, you can maybe a lot like Veiling Breeze can buy you a turn or half a turn. Clarent has multiple uses and can kind of buy you a couple of turns if you need them, because you have this ability just to close the game before they can even set up and find a lot of their interaction by just getting a cheeky kind of Honed by Fire, Rending Flames line off. If they haven't found the breeze, then they're going to be in a lot of trouble. Again, this is a list where you could consider the Nullifying Mirror if you want to play that early, but I think the materialized lines on it are maybe a little tight, a little harder to necessarily find the time to do that. So we do see in the sideboard for Caban no material deck cards at all, and I'm sure that has something to do with it. Just saying he's got the lines he likes, he wants to draw the cards, he wants to put the swords out, and instead just putting in all main deck cards. We even see the tech for Seiryuu in here with the Immolation Traps, and then the Devastating Blows, another card that's very good against Merlin as a way to clear off the Incarnate Majesty, the Majestic Spirit, as well as against Seiryuu, because this combined with Crux Knight can get to enough damage to just take it off the board. So a lot of good options there, a lot of good tech, and it's a very, very solid list. Now that's not to count out Merlin at all. Here's main deck Perfy's list from Niagara, and Merlin still does very Merlin things. Prismatic Edge, Majestic Spirit, and then we're going to go for, of course, those fireballs to close the game. It is honestly, Merlin, I think, is the harder list of the two to play right now. So I would only be picking Merlin if you're very, very experienced with Merlin. You have to know when you have to waste fireballs on allies so that you can survive and then find the kill later. You have to be able to go late. You have to know how to level, when to level, and how to deal with the sensor plays. It is not the easier list of the two to play. I just can't imagine that it is, and the matchups can be a little bit tougher as well. But Merlin is Merlin, right? And when Merlin gets that level 3, she can just start to draw cards, and she can win games when the opponent stumbles and can't find any way to close it any faster. And that is where she is super, super good. A lot of this is very, very standard. Now, Perfy's list does have an interesting number of kind of like techie cards in here. He loves the Ignite the Soul as a cheeky way to deal 1 damage to a lot of problem allies that do exist in the format that go for the Windmill Engineer Reclaim. You just ignite the Windmill Engineer. It breaks the Crystallized Destinies that are coming out to try and stop fireballs. It's a nice cheeky card, and you can get that floating memory from it when you are Merlin level 2, which is obviously that's when you want it the most, which is really nice, and goes for both the wind and water cards in the main board to be able to get the maximum power Spirit Blade Ascension, Prismatic Edge sometimes. Very cool. I do like Perfy's cheeky duplicitous replication in here as well. Like, hey, if you're going to play Merlin 2, instead of your Majestic Spirit, how about our Majestic Spirit? I like it. I like it a lot. I think that's really fun. Does run the Blanches in here, so does have a little bit of a stronger game. As a little bit of game into Razorgale, although without those wind ways to like reclaim Blanche, it is something that Razorgale can answer, but it's an answer to a lot of other cards, other Merlin decks. Even Seiryuu, this can blank enough of the damage, especially with the influence that Merlin can build to slow it down if they haven't gotten the turbo start. So this is, a solid Merlin list. We've talked about Merlin a million times in the past. Probably don't have to go too much more in depth, but a good list to bring if you are a Merlin fan and really want to play it still before our Assassin Merlin enters the metagame. Now, Limelight's Fire Oblation Ciel. This is a list we have not covered a ton on the channel during this metagame. It was very good in the Ryle metagame, fell off a little bit, but Limelight as one of the pioneers of this deck, if not the pioneer, and brought it to Auckland and topped with it, really proving that it still has what it's worth. Now, I love that he hybridized his spirits in here with Serene and regular Spirit of Fire. Serene giving you that recover, which is good when decks are just going a little too fast for this. And I think this is clutch going against Seiryuu, because Seiryuu otherwise can do a lot of work into this deck. But Lime's got a really, really nasty, strong combo here in the Umbra that if you're not familiar with it, we have to talk about the whole point of this is you're going to use your fire discard effects, pitch the Advent of the Stormcaller, omen it, and then you are able to use that Baleful Oblation to deal X damage to all units except for your champion, where X is the lowest reserve among your omens. But you might say, Dan, you got to put in other omens. You're not just going to only omen the Advent, right? And that's where the Orb of Sealing comes in. You put out the Orb of Sealing, then you flip over your non-Advent omens, and now look, the omen with the lowest reserve cost that we can see is Advent of the Stormcaller. So now Oblation is this crazy 3 cost with that Ciel bonus. Deal 15 damage to everything except your champion. Pretty ridiculous. Does kill Seiryuus when you find the combo, which is scary. And it's not the only way that this deck wins the game either. It's got the Carters, it's got the Extorting Blackjacks, it's got the Spirels. It is it's a deck that really hinges on the Umbra plays, right? Lime isn't even running things like the heavy swings. Really just wants to level. Really wants to get there. Even runs the Reduced to Ash main to deal with the Censor. Just says, I'm going to get there. I'm going to rely on my advanced elements. They're going to be stronger than your stuff. Merlin, you can draw cards. That's fine. I'm going to get my omens going. I'm going to use Manxam Armoire to be able to bring back maybe a Clutch Crystallized Destiny to hold down the fort, or just Oblation, omen it, pop Armoire, Oblation again. Like eventually you're going to win the game with the power of these plays. So it definitely is a strong deck when everything pops off. I do think it relies a little bit on finding your pitching, your liminal guides, your pitching, your floating memory, and you're hoping not to get censored. So going into a heavy wind metagame, you'd think this would have a tough time, but Lime sailed through. He managed to get through, even though Auckland was more wind representative. So I think it just shows that, again, in this format, even though it's highly focused on wind and fire, if you're very good at a list, if you know all the lines, you know how to play, it's a good choice to bring. All right, and then we're going to close things out with Water Genbu, piloted by Superior at Ascent Niagara Falls. Now, no water decks made it in to top 8 at Auckland. There will be water decks at Akihabara. How much representation will they have? I'm not entirely sure, but Genbu is probably the one I would bring if I was going to bring water for sure, because it has what all these decks have, which is a guaranteed way to go over the top and win the game. And the kind of the hallmark of Genbu, it has a bunch of ways to do that, right? Which is why it is so strong, why it has always been a good pick ever since the deck kind of came together. You can stratagem, you use stratagem to do 1,000,000 damage based on your float. You can just straight mill them out with Fractal of Polar Depths. You can do the fun stuff with your Genbu, where you're going to use the Resonating Fugue to flip its life to be its power after you activate it, so it does 1,000,000 damage on an attack. And you could just beat down. You put out these Seaside Ringleaders in attack, and the opponent doesn't want to kill them, but they kind of have to. And then you put in your Frostward Paladins, and you attack with those. And you can just kind of plink that damage on, even just not using Fugue on your Genbu and attacking for 3 every turn. Or bringing out this Tideholder Claymore just to push the damage as well. It's just got so many different routes that it can take to win the game. And that is what makes it so strong. Now, Water's issue right now is that a lot of the decks are too definitive and a little too fast. And it takes strays from some of the other cards in the format that exist. Like, people play Censor to deal with the fire decks, to deal with Merlin, to deal with the Lorraine and the Ciel. And so that's another thing that now just has to be dealt with in Genbu as well. They're playing Nullifying Lantern to deal with Razorgale, and Genbu has to deal with that as well. And Genbu has all these answers, but Genbu is just like often a turn slower than it needs to be. Genbu takes strays from people teching for Seiryuu as well. Just being able to have, sort of like the built-in answers to the flipped Shenju. Things like Ensnaring Fumes, things like Ravaging Tempest can do work against this. It's a deck that when you find everything, the lines are super strong. The advantage is really good when the opponent doesn't have the tech, really good against it. But it's just not always able to kind of pull together. It's just going to take too much damage to some of the aggressive decks in the format right now. And I think that makes it just a little more reliant on things going your way if you're choosing to play this at a gigantic event like Ascent Akihabara, where the field's going to be crazy. And we are going to see a lot of these decks, and you're also going to see random decks that you're not quite ready for. I don't know. It's tough to me. If you're a Water diehard, I still, like I said, if you practice, if you're good at the list, bring the list. It's going to be really good. But I think Going into Phantom Monarchs, we're going to see a big resurgence for water. We have a couple reasons for that. We have the rule change, and if you need to check on that again, link in the description below for my video talking about how the first turn works now and why that's going to be beneficial to especially water. But additionally, we're seeing Water Merlin, we're seeing Water Alice, and we're seeing just a lot of generic water support so far that's looking pretty strong. That's, I think, going to help water get to the stage of the game where it can control the game better, as well as having that ability to get more control on the first turn of the game. So I wouldn't count water out going into the Phantom Monarchs metagame, but it is definitely tougher right now, and I think it relies on a lot of player skill and a little bit of matchup luck to make it there. That said, this is still a very reasonable choice if you want to bring water. Superior is Genbu. Of course, Superior is incredible. Obviously does super well, and if you're very good, it's definitely a deck you can bring as well. But that is going to do it. I know this is a super long video, everyone, but hopefully you found a few little nuggets of wisdom in here as we go to the end of the Distorted Reflections metagame and then are looking towards the release of Phantom Monarchs. I will see you all at Ascent Akihabara. If you're going, stop by and say hi. Very, very excited for that event. It's going to be a ton of fun. But that's going to do it for our final DTR meta update. We'll see what happens when Phantom Monarchs releases. We'll see you then. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.